1 o'clock. I think everybody's had lunch and it's time to get back into Stormwater Awareness Week. And we have Bob Shults joining us again. And this is a topic I really want to hear about because this is a relatively new topic. It's only been out for about 3 years, this having to do winterization plans for Caltrans. Now, we've been preparing for the winter for years, and that's kind of the point of the permit. But this is a specific program that Caltrans has. And Bob is a trainer of the water pollution control managers, and he has done a lot of Caltrans work. And so we're very blessed to have him here today. So Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then it's all yours.
All right. So getting things kicked off here. So as John mentioned, I'm a water pollution control manager trainer. So this topic, this seminar is going to be on both the water pollution control manager training that's required and also the Caltrans water pollution control winterization planning amendment that's required now and was due a couple of weeks ago on September 15th. So we're going to go over both things. I'm going to kind of get into talk about the water pollution control manager training at the first half of this seminar, which I've talked about the last couple of Stormwater Awareness Week, just to make sure everyone understands it, understands who should be trained, that kind of thing. And then we're gonna, at the amendment that came, or I'm sorry, the spec amendment that came out that included the water pollution control manager training, 8-hour training, also included this requirement for a winterization planning amendment once a year. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the history of that, and then I'm gonna give you my explanation of the way we're doing them, the way we're filling those winterization plan amendments out, with some insight from some of the Caltrans district stormwater folks that have given me comments and given us comments on our winterization plans, hopefully to make it a cleaner and easier thing for you guys to implement in the future. As John mentioned, that the chat is available if you have questions. And they'll, WGR, John, or Rebecca will be kind of looking at the chat as it comes up. I won't be paying as much attention to it while I'm presenting here. But go ahead and throw questions up on the chat. If John will break in if there's something that's really topical we need to deal with at that moment to make it easy. Excuse me. But there'll be a question and answer time at the end. We'll be under an hour for this seminar. So there'll be question and answer time at the end for us to kind of go through anything else that's come up or issues you guys have had. So please bring it to the table. Get back in here. Okay, I'm Bob Shults. I'm a professional civil engineer. I'm a co-owner of Verux, Inc. We're based out of Sacramento, California, founded in 2010. We're a full-service stormwater consulting firm. Provide document prep, program audit, review, Swep inspection services. Work for contractors, agencies, municipalities, developers, along with the Swep and water pollution control program, ESCP, stormwater soil loss prevention plan development, and related management. We also have, we also do some construction management, and we have a background in heavy civil. I worked for a heavy civil contractor, was a project manager, general superintendent, estimator during my time there. I also worked as a consultant doing just project management work for large mixed-use master plan communities. So have that experience as well and try and bring that to the table as a professional in stormwater. Excuse me, just finished lunch, so trying to get my throat back and going again. As I mentioned, so my certificates, I'm a trainer of record for the QSD and QSP training. I do not give a QSD and QSP training course. I have this as a credential. And so that if something goes wrong on one of my project sites, I could do a training that would be required by the regional board by a tour. So have that. I'm also a QSD, obviously, and a QSP. I am, as we're going to talk in detail about, I have a certificate of completion for the Water Pollution Control Manager 8-hour course, trained myself. I'm a trainer for that, and I've trained a lot of people. I also have a Title 22 hazardous waste generator training, which I'll explain why that's necessary in a minute. Little personal brag, my son, who was currently in college and is playing and starting tight end for the University of Nevada. So that's what I'm doing on weekends. I'm traveling to Nevada or other far-flung places to watch him play football on weekends. So Anyway, added value for all, kind of already mentioned this, but please ask questions, discuss your experiences, contact me in the future. You'll see at the end, my last slide, as we're going through questions and stuff, my email, my phone number. Contact me if you have questions about any of this stuff. Feel free, get a little free consulting out of it. Talk to me if you have questions about this stuff in particular, about the Caltrans requirements. As a trainer, I'm happy to answer your questions as they come up. Okay, so Verux, here's a little shot of our website front page, stormwater compliance, construction management. We do the Caltrans 8-hour water pollution control manager training. So you go to my website, click on book training class, and it'll open up the available classes. Something to note when it comes to that. So, and we're obviously be talking about this in particular, but that we have classes right now you can go and sign up for. And we will, and I am willing to talk to you about coming to you. I have trained, I've done trainings in San Diego, I've done several in the Central Valley, I've done them on the Central Coast, done them up as far as Redding. I do a lot of them here in Sacramento where I'm based. Verux has an office in Sacramento. We also have an office in Fresno and an office in Santa Rosa. So we've done trainings at both of those locations and happy to help out. But beyond that, though, like next week, I am going to be doing on October 4th, I'm going to be doing a training in Fresno, which is not an everyday occurrence. I do the training in Sacramento once a month or so. I have one coming up on October 19th and another one on December 7th that are, so periodically every month and a half, I'm doing a training in Sac. But I will go to other places, and kind of uniquely this month, next week, I have one in Fresno. So if you're in the Central or South Central Valley, and that is a more convenient place for you, please consider signing up for that class. I have spots available still on October 4th, Tuesday, because I'm not there that often. I have done other trainings in Fresno, but it has been quite some time. So anyway, and if you have someplace else that you happen to be and you have a group of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people, give me a call. We could talk about it, whether I can make it worth my while to make the travel to you to do it, or open it up and get your group and add more by advertising. So anyway, happy to consider that. So please give me a call. But again, currently on my website, you could sign up for my Fresno training class or a couple of Sacramento classes. Okay. The other thing to note is that Verux is the clearinghouse for the public database for all water pollution control managers who are trained in California. So if you end up being trained by myself or someone else, you end up on the database, which is at the Verux website. So we house that database. So if you are listed as a water pollution control manager on a Swep or water pollution control program, the stormwater coordinator RE, in order to verify, can go to the website, go to Verux, go to the certified search portion of our website and search for you and confirm that you were done. We have new functionality over the last month where you can actually list a person by name, obviously, which we had before, but now you can list company or city. So someone can then go and look for you. If they're like, I need a water pollution control manager, I don't have anyone approved, they can go to the Verux website, they can go to the database, and they can search by Fresno and find all the people who have been trained as water pollution control managers in the Fresno area. So we can do it by city. And then the query, when it is complete, the query comes back with something like this. You put Bob Shults in, my company, the city, the date I was trained, and who I was trained by. So trained by myself. Self-trained. So there you go. That is the database that we have. Just give you some statistics on the people who have been trained for the 8-hour water pollution control manager training thus far. So I have trained 404 people. All others, the other 7 companies that are eligible to train, have trained 500. So there are a total of 909 as of today, people who have been trained as water pollution control managers, or gone through the 8-hour water pollution control manager training as of right now. Okay, so the training timeline and overview to talk about that training. January 2020 is when the blast came out from Caltrans saying, hey, this is happening. And the new training requirements and the new Winterization Plan amendment requirements were announced that they were going to start coming out and being advertised on jobs. April of 2020 is when the first Caltrans projects with the new training requirements were advertised for bid. July of 2020 is when the first projects that required the training in order to be a water pollution control manager were awarded. In that window there, from January to July of 2020, COVID happened, obviously, and inherited the ability to train large groups and hold in-person classes. Caltrans has from the beginning and continued to remain very clear that they want in-person hands-on training for this requirement. So there have been a lot of discussions, especially because of COVID, about the potential for doing this training online. And Caltrans has determined that they really feel they want the hands-on portion of it, so they're not allowing online training still to this day and through all of COVID. So Caltrans reiterated that. And that was a requirement. Due to the difficulty getting widespread training to potential water pollution control managers, Caltrans issued the following guidance for contractors and REs for a zero-cost change order to remove the requirement for 8-hour training on a project-by-project basis. So this came out during COVID. This directive that stated that because of coronavirus pandemic, availability of in-person training for the water pollution control manager, the revised Section 13 for the 8-hour water pollution control manager training can be deferred on a project-by-project basis for a no-cost change order and time adjustment. So that came out back in July of 2020 as things were about to hit. In most cases, at this point in time, Caltrans REs are not allowing this change order due to the current availability of training classes. So you saw the statistics, you saw how many people are trained at this point. This is still out there as far as I know with Caltrans. And so on a project-by-project basis, if the availability of the training is not there, you're a remote project in a remote place, you haven't had a chance to be trained yet, you can still request that no-cost change order to revert back to the old spec. But as my understanding currently is that people are required to have 8-hour training at this point because COVID is, the availability of training is out there. So most likely not going to be able to use the no-cost change order anymore, and you will have to have the water pollution control manager training. So if you don't have it and you need it, get signed up.
Bob, this might be a good time to put this question in here.
Sure.
Someone asked, are there previous requirements or certificates for this training? And they shouldn't get confused between what this is and what we used to have, right? The 24-hour training?
Yes. So no, and I'm going to talk about all the things. As we move forward here, the next few slides, we're going to talk about the pieces to the puzzle, the things you need to be a water pollution control manager, above and beyond the 8-hour water pollution control manager training, and the difference between an assistant water pollution control manager and an actual water pollution control manager. So I'm going to go through those things now quickly to explain that stuff. So there are some other certificates that are required. Prior to the construction general permit in 2009, Caltrans used to have a 24-hour training that was required to be a water pollution control manager. When the CGP came out in 2009, Caltrans got rid of the 24-hour training and said, hey, if you got to be a QSD, that's enough. That's a 3-day training as it is. That's all you got to have. And you have to be a QSD to be a water pollution control manager. They determined over the years since then that, we're missing some of the understanding of the language of Caltrans. And so that's the reason why they decided they wanted this 8-hour training so that people really understand the language. So I'm going to go through a little narrative of how, what you need altogether to be a water pollution control manager. So when you have the training, the overview of the training, you're going to learn about being a water pollution control manager. You're going to learn about other CGP compliance strategies during the 8-hour training. A water pollution control manager must be an integral member of the project management team. That's the thing. As of right now, there is no refresher training that's required, but I would anticipate with a new CGP coming out, there will be additional training or follow-up or refresher training that'll be required. But right now, we haven't determined that yet because the new CGP hasn't come out yet. So at the end of this training, you receive a certificate of completion and you're eligible for 8 hours of PDUs. The one thing is that I mentioned it earlier, is that if you deal with Caltrans, you should get on this and sign up for the lists served, which is where Caltrans communicates changes to their specs. So when this training requirement came out, it was blasted out in an email in January of 2020. And so if you sign up for the lists.dot.ca.gov, mailman list info, if you don't get this down, you can email me and I'll get it to you. You sign up for it, and then you'll get email blasts about changes to the requirements. As here's an example. Dear subscriber, we posted a water pollution control manager qualification requirement change. You don't get spammed by these all the time. It's like once a month because they don't change Caltrans specs very often, but it'll come out, and this will be the first way you'll find out about changes to the Caltrans specs. So the excerpt from it, when it came out, was to state that from that point forward in July, by July of 2020, that water pollution control managers, alternate water pollution control managers, or assistant water pollution control managers must have the 8-hour training. Submit a certificate upon completion of 8-hour training. That's the requirement as of July of 2020. And it's a one-time training. So here's the matrix that I promised. So QSD and QSP. QSD, you have to have a three-day class, right? You have to pass the QSD exam, and you must maintain an underlying credential, okay? So you can develop and amend SWPs and water pollution control programs. A QSP has a 2-day class, pass the QSP exam, maintain an underlying credential, develop and amend water pollution control programs, when we're talking Caltrans here. A water pollution control manager is a Caltrans designation. It is the person that is going to manage and administer SWPs and water pollution control programs. With the new spec change, QSD or P could be the water pollution control manager on either a SWP or a water pollution control program, which is a change. In order to be a water pollution control manager, you have to be a D or a P, you have to take the 8-hour training, and you have to have the Title 22 hazardous waste training. I'll explain that in a moment, why the Title 22. But you have to have all of those things to be a water pollution control manager. One of the things that changed previous to this new requirement for the 8-hour training, just like on CGP projects, a QSD or P can delegate, can create a designee to do work for them and under their certificate. So you could train a person who doesn't have any kind of a certificate to go out and fill out inspection reports, sample, do that with an individual training, and to work under your cert, and then you have to sign off on it as a QSD or P. Water pollution control managers could do the same prior to this spec change. They could designate anyone that doesn't have a certification. They could train them to do sampling, to fill out the SWP inspection reports, and those kind of things. The water pollution control manager would have to sign off, but they didn't have to have any special certificates. The new requirement for the 8-hour training says that you cannot delegate or designate someone else to do the work under your certificate without them having the 8-hour water pollution control manager training. And that is what a water pollution control manager assistant is. So a lot of people need this 8-hour training, because if you want to be in compliance with the specs for Caltrans and you want to have someone work under you as the water pollution control manager, they have to be an assistant water pollution control manager. They have to take the class. They don't have to have any other cert, but they have to have taken the class. If you were allowed to get, the one thing to note is if you were allowed to have the no-cost change order to get out of having to have the 8-hour training, it reverts back to the fact that you have to be a QSD to be the water pollution control manager on a SWP project, which is what it used to be. You can't be a water pollution control manager on a water pollution control program project unless you're a QSD. That's what the old spec says. That goes away with this 8-hour water pollution control manager training. Here's the language from it, which states assign a water pollution control manager. And this is the direct language that people are being held to when they submit their SWPs and water pollution control programs. You must assign a water pollution control manager to implement the SWP or water pollution control program. You must assign an alternate water pollution control manager to perform all responsibilities of the water pollution control manager in his or her absence. The alternate water pollution control manager must have the same qualifications as a water pollution control manager. You may assign an assistant water pollution control manager to act under the supervision of the water pollution control manager to inspect, repair, and maintain water pollution control practices, collect water quality samples, and record water quality data. You may have more than one assistant water pollution control manager. So I'm going to talk about this language directly because we're being held to this. Obviously, you have to assign, when you submit your SWP or water pollution control program, you have to assign a water pollution control manager, period. You definitely have to have that person, no matter what. Got to have a person that meets the requirements as your water pollution control manager. It also says here you have to assign an alternate water pollution control manager to perform the responsibilities when the water pollution control manager is gone. So we are getting SWPs and water pollution control programs rejected or returned and saying, hey, you've named a water pollution control manager, but you didn't name an alternate. You have to name both, or we're getting SWPs and water pollution control programs kicked back. So you got to name two people, a primary and an alternate water pollution control manager, and they both have to be eligible to be a water pollution control manager. And then it says you may assign. So you don't have to assign an assistant water pollution control manager, but we recommend that you do if you have any, because it says you may. So if someone came back and said, well, you didn't list an assistant water pollution control manager, we reject your SWP. They can't. Caltrans can't, because you could just say, look, it's either going to be a water pollution control manager or an alternate. Those are the only people who are going to work on the job. You can do that. But we suggest if you have 5 people at your company that are eligible to be an assistant water pollution control manager, I suggest you list all 5. So you list your primary, your alternate water pollution control manager, and you list all 5 of the water pollution control manager assistants. That way there's no amendment that needs to be done later on in the job. You can just fire an email off to the RE and say, Johnny is going to be the assistant this week in place of Mary. And they're already listed in the document, so there's nothing else that has to be done. So it's my suggestion, and we've had this feedback and have SWEP's response, comments come back saying you didn't list an alternate water pollution control manager. You have to list one because it says assign here. It doesn't say you may assign. It says assign. So giving you a heads up on that. This is just the language from the spec that states that you have to obtain a certificate of completion of an 8-hour water pollution control manager training. This is the actual language that I've talked to in great detail now about an assistant water pollution control manager. They have to be trained, and they have to have taken the 8-hour water pollution control manager training course in order to be an assistant water pollution control manager, in order to be able to be a designee who does inspections, repair, maintain water pollution control practices, collects water quality samples, report water quality data. You have to have the 8-hour water pollution control manager training. A water pollution control manager, so it's a Caltrans designation. Here's the definition. You have to be the primary contact responsible for water pollution control work. You have to oversee the water pollution control work. You have to maintain water pollution control practices, the maintenance of it, the inspections, the inspection reports, the preparation of the reads, the sampling analysis, the preparation and submittal of NAL exceedance reports, violation reports. The SWEP annual certification is now gone. This is where at the end of this, we're going to get into the winterization plan amendment. The SWEP annual certification was kind of a garbage in, garbage out thing where you once a year in July, you said, yes, I did everything right. So it was a 1-pager and it was kind of unnecessary. So we got rid of it, but we replaced it with a mandatory winterization plan amendment that's due on September 15th, which I'm going to go into detail on. Annual reports, water pollution control practice status report. You have to oversee and enforce hazardous waste management practices. You have to be able to have the authority to mobilize crews to stop construction activities if they're causing water pollution control issues. Ensure that all employees have current training, implement the authorized SWEP, revise the water pollution control program, be at the job site within 2 hours of being contacted. And this is something that is definitely being adhered to, because so people can't just farm out their water pollution control manager certificate without seeing the job. The intent is for the water pollution control manager to have intimate knowledge and be involved in the job site day-to-day operations from a stormwater standpoint. Water quality monitors are also required, and we have 401 sampling on Caltrans projects. A water quality monitor has to be listed, and they're expected to have the same qualifications as the water pollution control manager, and they could be one and the same person. And so my interpretation is then if they want to designate someone and delegate the work to do the sampling for water quality objectives like 401 sampling, they need to be an assistant water pollution control manager and have had the 8-hour training. So something to note that is necessary. The 8-hour training is necessary in other ways other than stormwater. You must be in section 14 environmental stewardship. You must have knowledge of solid waste storage and disposal procedures. You also must have hazardous waste understanding and be trained. This is where it states here, successfully completed a training under Title 22 so that you can oversee and enforce hazardous waste management, inspect hazardous waste storage, and oversee hazardous waste transportation activities on the job site. Okay, so that's where this Title 22 training. So on Caltrans projects, to be a water pollution control manager, you need the Title 22 training, because if there is or was generated or is or will be generated or ever any historical contamination on a Caltrans job, you can't be the water pollution control manager without having had Title 22 training. And send me an example of a Caltrans job that doesn't have some sort of hazardous waste, and good for you. It just basically doesn't come up. So you got to have this training. This is kind of the one that most everybody gets, hazmatschool.com. It's last time I checked, it's $125. It's a 4-hour online course. You need to have this certificate or you'll be rejected as a water pollution control manager, or some other certificate proves that you had Title 22 hazardous waste generator training. If you're a HAZWOPER certified, 40-hour HAZWOPER, you're overqualified. The HAZWOPER certificate takes the place of this. You don't have to have this as well. Okay. So that's a quick and dirty flying through what happens on the water pollution control manager 8-hour training. Again, a water pollution control manager needs to be able to do these things by definition, which is to be primary contact, maintain all the water, understand maintenance of all the water pollution control practices, all the inspections, manage all the inspection reports, understand hazardous waste management practices, have the authority to mobilize crews, be at the job site within, implement and authorize SWEP water pollution control program, be at the job site within 2 hours of being contacted. So the 8-hour training, we're going to go over all this. You're going to do a training overview. You're going to talk about the definition of responsibilities, a lot of what I've already just talked about. We're going to go over the BMPs, inspections, the documentation. We're going to do case studies on filling out the CEM forms. A tremendous amount of what they're trying to get out of this from an 8-hour water pollution control manager training is for people to understand the language of Caltrans, understand the paperwork, understand how to fill it out properly, when to fill it out, the timing of fill it out. It's all really important, and it's a big beef that Caltrans stormwater coordinators have had. People don't understand their language and how to fill out their paperwork properly, and they spend a tremendous amount of time kicking paperwork back. So we're going to go over that in great detail. We're going to talk about the resources that Caltrans has for SWEP and water pollution control programs and the preparation of them. We're going to talk about sampling and analysis plans, and we're going to have a sampling tutorial. We're going to do hands-on sampling training in my class. We're going to talk about reporting and miscellaneous. We're going to go into detail on when to fill out a notice of discharge form. Notice of discharge forms are something that's Caltrans stormwater coordinators feel like are underutilized and need to be utilized more consistently. So there's a whole section in my training on that, and then review and questions. So that is what you're going to get when you come to my 8-hour water pollution control or any of the consultants 8-hour water pollution control manager training course, so you understand that. Okay. Now, the last part of this class, we are going to go over the Winterization Plan Amendment. As I mentioned, when the training requirement came out, the 8-hour water pollution control manager training specification change came out officially in April of 2020, announced in January of 2020. One of the other changes that came with it was the requirement for a Winterization Plan Amendment. So here we are. Winter is coming. And we know that because unseasonable rainstorm hit us a week ago. Like 2 weeks after it was 115 degrees out, we had a good size inch-plus rainstorm in a lot of places. Winter's coming. So Caltrans and part of the committee with Caltrans and industry determined that, as we were going through and adding this training spec change, is like, hey, we have this annual certification that really doesn't do anything, that is due in July, and you sign off on the job being okay. Well, let's get rid of it. But there was some question about, like, Caltrans ought to have a requirement for a Winterization Plan Amendment. And I agree. It should be standard operating procedure. I believe there's another Stormwater Awareness Week seminar coming up on winterization planning, so you should go. But the point of it is that it should be standard operating procedure. If you have a project that's going to winter over, that's going to hit the winter months, that you are doing an amendment to update your project and to make sure you have a plan and how to protect and defend your job. Caltrans said, you're right, and we need to formalize this and have a date certain when the thing is in place, so that we can go back and forth, we can get on the same page with our contractors and make sure that we're not putting ourselves in harm's way or having a job that's wide open when it shouldn't be, okay? So the Winterization Plan Amendment came out, and this is what it states. So submit a revised SWEP annually before September 15th, and any time any of these things happen. So you should be submitting SWEP amendments anytime any of these happens year-round, but you're also going to be required to do it before September 15th from now on. So changes in work activities could affect discharge. Water pollution control practices are added or changed as change order work. Water pollution control practices are added at your discretion. Changes in the quantity of disturbed soil. Objectives for reducing or eliminating pollutants and stormwater discharges have not been received. You received a written notice or permit violation for the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So you have to do an amendment with this or other things that change on the job site. Locations of sampling points change, you need to do an amendment. But you also need to do one by September 15th. And that is here explained. Revise the SWEP through amendment. The annual SWEP amendment must include an annual winterization plan. The annual winterization plan must describe the preparation for the upcoming rainy season. Again, should be part of standard operating procedure before this was required, but now it is, and here are the rules by which you have to do this. So by September 15th, okay, by September 15th, you are required to submit a winterization plan amendment to Caltrans, and you must meet the 6 requirements that are listed here, or you will get comments, and you may get comments depending on how you respond to these things. So this updated schedule, materials and labor, management of stormwater through the job site, management areas within the job site, changes to monitoring locations, and slope stabilization. I just saw, quick aside, I saw something come up in the chat from Janet Rodriguez. Good question. Is the winterization plan just for location? Just for locations that get snow? No, absolutely not. A winterization plan amendment by September 15th is due for any SWEP job that is active after September 15th. So now you may be able to work with your RE. If the job's supposed to be terminated by October 1st and you're really all buttoned up and everything else, you absolutely can talk to your RE. But by contract, you're required to submit a winterization plan amendment for any job that's going to go beyond September 15th. Now, it may be mostly blank, or you may have 1 through 6, and the answer is, the job's going to be done on every one of these things. But technically speaking, you're required to submit one. So whether it snows or not, you are supposed to do a winterization plan amendment by September 15th on any SWEP job for Caltrans, period. You're required to do it. So let's go through these items. So an updated schedule. So the updated schedule is showing what you're doing when you're doing it, right? So it is a backup for a lot of what you're talking about with winterization. Materials and labor. Now, this was a confusing one to me. And there are different ways to interpret this, or initially there were different ways to interpret this, but this is, I recently asked, and thank you very much to Deanna, District 3 Stormwater Coordinator, who helped me with a definition of this. So here is the explanation. The labor and material section tended to outline what is needed to prepare the site for the winter. You could have a narrative accompanied by drawings to show what you will install and where, how long it will take to install, and by how many people it is important. The labor materials section should help the contractor plan accordingly so they can realistically implement it prior to the rain coming. There should be a discussion with your contractor so you're all on the same page as to what materials you need, how much, and how many laborers, and realistically, how long it will take to install. This way, the plan can be in place so the site is prepared. You can also include a general note stating BMPs will be maintained as needed, or something along those lines. All of this is an estimate. It should be used as a planning exercise, okay? So the materials and labor piece, I'm gonna show you an example in a minute of one. Management of stormwater through the job site, number 3, so you need to have drawings that show where your runoff, conveyance, and downslope if they've changed. Management of areas with the job site, including areas that work as suspended, areas of soil stabilization, new disturbed soil areas, changes to monitoring locations, and slope stabilization. Those 1 through 6 items need to be included in your winterization plan amendment. So then a SWEP amendment, you use the CEM 2008 for the certification, right? A SWEP amendment starts with the 2008, explains the job, it gives you an amendment number, and has a place for everyone to sign off. Then the body of the amendment is attached to it. There's also a SWEP amendment log, a CEM 2009, that has to be filled out, where there's a list of each of the amendments that have gone through in sequential order and an explanation of them. These are all part of your requirements to fill out in the CEM forms that have to be filled out for a planning amendment, or any amendments, including the winterization plan amendment.
Bob, there was a very insightful question, and it brings up a good point. Can a water pollution control manager revise the SWEP through this process for a winterization plan, even if they're not a QSD? Because as you mentioned, a water pollution control manager can be a QSP.
They can, but they can't revise a SWEP. So
Okay.
if you're a QSP water pollution control manager, you're allowed to recommend or suggest changes to the SWEP, but you cannot change a SWEP. So you can be the water pollution control manager, you can make the suggestions, but your QSD has to be involved to make an actual amendment to a SWEP. On a water pollution control program, a water pollution control program, a QSP can amend a water pollution control program, but not a SWEP. You can make suggestions. It was in that language. I went through it fast, but it actually is in language in the Caltrans specs that state you can suggest changes as a QSP, but you cannot make changes to a SWEP.
And a water pollution control plan does not require a winterization plan. Is that correct?
And it does not. It does not. But at the same time, again, SOP, it's not in the specs saying a water pollution control plan has to have one by September 15th and meet those dates. But if you're doing a water pollution control program job and you're going to winter over, then there are requirements that are very clear in the specs about when a water pollution control program needs to be amended. And if you're going to work in the winter, I guarantee you're going to meet the requirement, or there's going to be a requirement in there that by spec you should be doing an amendment. And I would call it a winterization amendment. right? Because that's what you're talking about. You know, a winterization plan amendment, the purpose of it is to try and get yourself to a defensible space in the winter. And again, that's not everything we're talking about today, but it's a big part of it. The purpose of this and why this should have been an SOP for everyone before this Caltrans requirement came through is that you need to be prepared for the winter. And one of the best modes for doing that is to do a winterization plan amendment. You get everyone together. Everyone knows winter's coming. You're meeting. You're talking about it. You're talking about what the goal is, what you're trying to do this winter. You're talking about creating a defensible space. You're trying to pull in and reduce your staging areas. You're trying to get stabilized all the areas where you don't need to work that winter. And you're focused on getting that done. And then having it, okay, now we're just focusing on working in this one section. And we have the BMPs there in our yard ready to implement prior to rain event. And it's possible to do. The problem with this time of year is that you got jobs that are wide open. And if it rains tomorrow, you don't have time to get everything stabilized, right? So anyway, so that's a big part of the winterization plan. Okay, so here is my example winterization plan, one that we just submitted and had approved. So project, here is our certification page, right? It's water pollution control SWep amendment number 3. Everybody signs off on it. So then you have the amendment log, which explains in sequential order. This is our 3rd amendment on this job. We have 1, 2, and 3, and the dates and everything else, and when it'll be accepted. Then we basically have created a template for our winterization plans that mimics what's in, the list from Caltrans, right? There are 6 items that are required. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that is what we do on our cover sheet for a winterization plan amendment. We have 1 through 6, and we have an explanation and narrative. And then there's a bunch of stuff that goes in the back end of this to add to it. But we're trying to make it simple for review. So this is our 2022-23 winterization plan. Updated schedule, see attached, and you'll see. Materials and labor related to water quality, water pollution control. The subcontractor, so we list the subcontractor as a crew installing permanent temporary erosion sediment control. Contractor will have a crew of 3 laborers to install BMPs as needed over the course of the winter. BMPs for temporary erosion include item 21, item 23, item 24, 25, and we list some quantities in there. So, it does talk about labor, but not total labor, but it does explain. And essentially the idea behind this, you saw from Deanna's comment, is we're trying to put materials and labor together so that it's clear, and it's clear to the reviewer, that it's going to take 3 weeks to get this winterization plan implemented. So we need to make sure that that's starting now. Or it's a small job and it's only going to take 2 days to get it implemented. So we got time. We can look at a 10-day window and decide when we're going to start. So that's the narrative process here that they're looking for in their comments. If you get comments on that item. Number 3, management of stormwater water through the job site. If your plan to adjust flow or drainage during the winter months from what is shown on the plans for run-on, runoff. No plan to adjust run-on, runoff, and downslope conveyance at this time. So that was our response. Areas of work, suspended areas in this winter. Work will be suspended, and we talk about the locations, and work that will not be. Locations 2 and 5 will be under winter suspension upon snowfall. Areas that will be stabilized and when, we talk about the locations and when our sediment control and what dates we're going to have it done. New disturbed areas are areas where work will remain active this winter. Temporary BFM will be used, and we talk about it if we're going to remain active. Any changes to monitoring locations? None. Plans for stabilization of slopes. All exposed and inactive slopes will be stabilized with BFN or temporary erosion control blanket. So the general narrative 1 through 6, which is required, and then you get into the actual plans that show all of this. This is a big job with a lot of pages of water pollution control drawings, but we attach the water pollution control drawing. Very clear. It's Amendment 3, the winterization plan. And then here's 1 page from those 30 that explains here's a yellow highlighted area to receive permanent erosion control. And so we're closing out a portion of the job, and hopefully not having to come back. And then we're talking about where we're working. There's a temporary stockpile that's going to have BFM on it. Exposed inlet at culvert protected with fiber rolled inlet protection. So that kind of thing. So you're giving the narrative and the description that goes with the cover page that explains what you're doing. Here's the schedule that we said was attached. So again, that's our example of a winterization plan amendment. The key thing is that you have a set of rules here. It's got to be turned in before September 15th. That gives you time to iterate. Typically, it's not going to rain on September 15th, although this year it's a little different. You've got your 6 items, so you need to respond to these 6 items, or you're definitely going to get comments back from the stormwater coordinators and REs. And then you go through it. Again, this is meant to be a collaborative exercise with the contractor, with the RE, with the project team to come up with a plan. And the purpose is that we don't go to jail, right? We don't end up with fines. We don't have problems on the job site because we've given ourselves an opportunity to close the job for winter or stabilize and protect the job for winter, and then focus on the areas where we have to work in the winter and focus on how we're going to protect those areas in a short duration time when a rain event's coming, and how we're going to open them back up after rains, between rain events over the winter. So there you go. That is the Winterization Plan and Water Pollution Control Manager Training Seminar. My info is here. Please do send me an email and call me if you have questions about this or stuff that's come up after this. If you have any questions about having a Water Pollution Control Manager training class or how to sign up, that kind of thing. And now I will open it up to questions, John.
Okay, we do have a few. Plus I got a few. Let's go back to talking about the alternate, because I think there was a little bit of confusion there. So can you have more than one assistant, or you can have more than one assistant? He said clearly that's the case, but can you have more than one alternate water pollution control manager?
Absolutely. Yes, you can have as many as you got. I mean, the reality is there is nothing, that language is what I've received comments from Caltrans. Also on that language, I can go back to it here. It's quite a ways back there, but I'll just keep going. But I'll talk as I go through it. So you can have, that language is what you're held to, that I mentioned previously. And the requirement is to meet that language, which says you have to assign, almost there, assign a water pollution control manager to implement the water pollution control program or SWep. So, and assign an alternate. That means you have a minimum of 1. But if you could list 10. I don't see a negative for listing as many as you've got. If you've got 4 people that are at your company that have the requirement that it can be a water pollution control manager, list 1 as the primary and list the other 3 as alternates. And I have received a comment once saying, and then we have, I don't know, I've got a whole bunch of people that can be listed as assistant water pollution control managers, and I have listed 10 people before, and I've gotten a comment going, why are all these people listed? Because I can. I mean, there is nothing saying you can't list a whole bunch of people on there. It just makes it so their info is there. I understand that it can be unnecessary, and so we've kind of gotten away from listing everyone at Verux who can be an assistant water pollution control manager, just so it doesn't eat up as much paper.
Right.
But there is no limit to that. And the beauty of it is, if you have 4 at your company, 1's listed as primary, the other 3 is listed as alternates, because you probably aren't going to know who's going to cover for you, John, if you're the primary, which of those other 3. It depends on the day and who's on vacation and all that stuff. So then you can just fire off it, because by the letter of the law, if it's only John and then somebody else that are listed as the alternate, and that alternate can't do it that week, then technically you have to do an amendment to get the other person listed as an alternate. So if you're listed, then you just fire an email off to the RE saying, hey, I'm on vacation and Mary is going to cover for me, and she's listed in the SWep, so you're good. And the same thing with assistants. You do not have to list assistant water pollution control managers, but it's smart to do it because they're most likely going to be the ones doing a lot of the training or a lot of the inspections. So, does that answer the question?
I think it does. So now this is about the time period for the winterization plan. I didn't hear any date specified. Logic would say something like September 15th through April 15th, or October 1st through April 30th. Is there a time period for this?
No, it is not specified. It really takes the place of what was, again, kind of what was loosely standard operating procedure, right? You're normally, on a lot of our other jobs, October 1st is kind of the date when we're really digging hard, deep into starting, getting our winterization plans done. Caltrans has moved, because of Caltrans, we get a jump start in our Caltrans jobs. We're doing them by September 15th, but we're looking forward to the winter season. So depending on where you are, there are people on this call that are in places where they have a different winter season than around here. But in Northern California, it still kind of follows those old dates, right? October 15th to April 15th, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. So
Right.
it's really the winter season is what you're covering with this. And in particular, the early winter is where we're going, what we're trying to do. You may get started and be, you get to April and it hasn't rained for 2 months. You may be opening more stuff up and needing to do another amendment at that point, just because you're changing what you're trying to take on at that point, right? So
Okay. I'm going to come back to this next question, but this is kind of related to what we were just talking about. So anyone designated or deputized to carry out on-site field work, such as inspections or sampling, they need to be an assistant water pollution control manager. The answer would be
yes.
Yes. And therefore need to have the 8-hour water pollution control manager training.
Yes.
Yes. I work for a county and I have struggled with the contractors QSB, QSD because they use biologists as Swep inspectors who clearly do not know what they should do or know how to perform these inspections. If this is correct, it would force those inspectors to get official training.
Yes.
Yes. In fact,
on Caltrans projects or projects that use Caltrans specifications, because the CGP hasn't changed anything. The CGP is the same. You can delegate or designate anyone to work under your certificate as the QSP or the QSD, as long as they have some level of training by you and you're willing to sign off on their paperwork. So the CGP hasn't changed. Caltrans has. Caltrans is very clear now. You cannot be a designate. You are out of compliance with their contract, with your contract with Caltrans, or another municipality uses Caltrans specs. You're out of compliance with your contract and the specs if someone is being delegated work from an assistant, from a water pollution control manager, and has not had the 8-hour training.
Which kind of also answers the question before that. Please give us information for the 8-hour training of the water pollution control plan, which is the same as the SWEP. It's just all the same 8-hour water pollution control manager training. If we do other projects, not Caltrans, do we need this training? No, you don't need this training.
Nope.
You need the QSP, QSD, and the appropriate underlying certification.
Yep, that's still the case.
And you can be delegated without needing any of that on a non-Caltrans project.
Exactly. Yep.
Of course, the new permit is actually going to change some of that, so definitely pay attention to the new permit. Now, I would like to. I think we've answered all the questions. If anyone watching has more questions, bring it on in. In fact, here's one: Is CT still Caltrans still requiring REAPs? If so, would Caltrans eventually stop asking for REAPs with a new permit?
Yes. Yeah, they're going to follow. Yeah, they're going to follow the same thing. The new permit's going to affect Caltrans significantly, just like it's affecting everyone else. Yeah. And if REAPs go away for Caltrans as well.
And we know from Monday's talk with Brandon Rosenboom that there's going to be a 2-year overlap. So we're going to be under the 2009 permit for 2 years, meaning REAPs. You're still doing REAPs if you're under the 2009.
Yes.
Now, some folks might say, well, I'll just go file for coverage under the 2022. That probably wouldn't be a good idea.
That opens up its own can of worms.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think you're better off doing the REAPs and being under the 2009.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about level of detail. Now, you and I were having some dialogue before we came on to this workshop. This is the 3rd year this has been out, these winterization plans. And you and I have been noticing, in fact, I noticed you're doing the same thing, firing off emails to Deanna or Dave Corpus or, you know, Michael Sweeney to get clarification on the list you're showing on here. I developed a template just like you did, almost identical. It's funny how close they were, because I just copied this and I just matter-of-factly answered all these questions.
Yes.
And I was shocked to have almost every winterization plan returned. Yeah, now I just lost a bunch of potential clients. But, you know, I was shocked. And I was, I had raised the bar up to what I found to be acceptable last year, which was a raising of the bar from what was the previous year.
Right.
Detail. There's a lot of detail. Like you showed I think a clip of an email from Deanna showing, yeah, exactly. Where did this come from? Is this just someone's interpretation?
Yes.
And that's where we're at. That's what I want people understanding.
That's where we're at. This is all we have.
Yes.
This is all we have. And this is an interpretation of what that says, because it says materials and labor. I mean, so we've, initially we were personally, Verux, we were vague when it came to this, because I didn't really, it doesn't say materials and labor and add all this detail. It just says materials and labor. So that can be interpreted many ways. And so early on, we were very general with it and saying, we're going to have for maintenance of BMPs, we have a crew of 2 laborers, and
right.
But this is an interpretation of one of the stormwater coordinator teams, a great team, an awesome team from District 3, who I think this is a reasonable interpretation. I don't disagree with this interpretation. I think it's a reasonable interpretation, but it is an interpretation.
And it's helpful. It's helpful.
But a different stormwater coordinator team could interpret this different.
And it would be nice to have this information ahead of time.
Yes, it would. It would. And this is something, that because of COVID, there's a Caltrans industry subcommittee on stormwater, that where a lot of this stuff comes from, or at least, a lot of these changes, if they at least go through the committee and get a chance to comment on some of those. This is good feedback. We have not met as often during COVID for obvious reasons with that committee. So this is good feedback to come back. So because here we are, year 3 of this stuff, right, John? And this is an issue, and you're bringing it up that we probably ought to have some sort of the stormwater coordinators at the overall Caltrans level. It'd be nice if they spoke and they came up with what they believe is a pretty good narrative of what their expectation is for winterization plan amendment, and that's consistent amongst the different Caltrans districts and the district stormwater coordinators. So I will request this from them, because this is, like I said, we're doing this, we're learning as we go, John, right?
Yeah.
And it's changing year to year.
So some lessons learned from this year, because there still might be some folks like us having to revise some winterization plans or even do them.
Yes.
One of the things I learned this year is the schedule. It just says updated schedule. So I did exactly what you did. I asked the contractor for a schedule and slapped it in there as an attachment.
Yep.
No, wrong. Every single one came back. They want what the expectation is, and this is why we're bringing it up right now. They want the BMPs identified. In other words, numbers 3, 4, and 6. They want to know when all that's happening, and it needs to be on the schedule. At least some of the reviewers that I had said that. And also just a great amount of detail on materials and labor was what I was finding. I'm like you, as a consultant, I give minimal information up front because that's what the contractor would like to see given, or at least minimal commitment, but they want a lot of detail. In fact, I had one come back and say, and for this crew, you're going to need to turn in a SEM 2023 training form for them to show that you trained them.
Well, let me see what I can say without getting in trouble here. I mean, there is a certain amount. So my pushback on it, which, you have to deal with these on a case-by-case basis. I think the intent, since I was a part of the, when this came out, when this spec change came out, the intent of this is to do what we were already doing or should have already been doing, which is to create winterization plans. So what you should be doing on CGP projects, you should be doing on any project that has winter work, is that you're trying to create an environment where you have a chance to protect your job site prior to those first rain events, which can be the most devastating, right? Because you're trying, all the contractors, and I was a contractor, are trying to get it, just give me 2 more weeks, right? I don't know if I had 2 more weeks, I'd have the whole job paved and done, right? So everyone's trying to push up against that first big rain event, and that's where you have more disturbance and everything else. So the the intent of this is to keep everybody out of trouble. So the intent is I think it's a legitimate thing. They want to know what it's going to take to get this plan implemented before the rain, so that you can narratively, with a schedule and materials and labor, can say, in order to get this job where I show on my plans, I need 3 weeks, I need 2 weeks, and I can justify it with my schedule, right, and my materials and labor, and it's possible. I think that's really the intent of this. So you can prove that. That's the intent. And going into some of that minute detail you're talking about, I think is not necessarily the intent, unless they're really picking you apart because you're putting something on the schedule or with your materials and labor that's unrealistic, and they know it, right? That's when I could see that pushback happening. Otherwise, I would be strongly having those meetings to say, what are we doing here? This kind of minute, micro detail is not getting us to where we need. We need to get this plan approved so we can get out there and start implementing it. That's what matters, right?
Yeah.
And what matters is hitting those schedule dates and saying that, yes, in 3 weeks, it's possible to have this job protected and ready for winter. That's me being practical, but also I think that most people, I think that's reasonable and practical. So, so some of those things, like, okay, now I'm not going to if you keep on pushing back on this thing, I'm not going to have this winterization plan approved until October 30th, and it's raining already, and we haven't gone out there and done anything yet. So let's get here.
Yeah, it's very well stated. Hey, we have, I know, I'm looking at the list of participants. We have people I know that have written winterization plans in 2022. Anybody want to unmute, want to share? We just got a couple minutes left before we end this workshop. Anybody want to unmute themselves and tell us maybe lessons learned from 2022? I know you're out there. I see you in the list. I'm not going to call in any names. I don't know. If you'd like to talk to us, that'd be great about your experiences this year. All right. Well, Bob, unless someone unmutes themselves real quick here, do we need, here's a question that just came in. Do we need hazmat training now or just before the new CGP requirements?
So the hazmat training piece is a part of Caltrans requirement to be a water pollution control manager. It's a Title 22 training. If you're going to be, as of now, in order to be a water pollution control manager on Caltrans projects, you need to have the Title 22 training on pretty much all Caltrans projects, because pretty much all Caltrans projects is or will have some sort of hazardous material on them. So you got to have it in order to be eligible to be a water pollution control manager. If you submit a credential that shows your QSD and your 8-hour water pollution control manager training, and there is no kind of HAZWOPER or Title 22 training that goes with it in your certificates, you're going to get rejected. Unless you can find that unicorn Caltrans job that has no hazardous waste on it. So you will be rejected by the stormwater coordinator.
It's super easy. It's super easy. It's 125 bucks. It says 4 hours. It took me about, 2 hours or less. It's super easy. Super easy. Here's a question. Would Caltrans consider developing a template for the winterization requirements? It looks like Bob and I have already developed our templates. They're almost identical.
We talked about this, and I actually saw here's my take on this. We talked about this, and they actually created kind of a draft template. And be careful. My answer is be careful what you wish for. It was adding a bunch of stuff that you don't. It made it harder. Sometimes it's a lot easier many times to create your own template like this. There's no magic to this template. The main thing about the template, either way, if they created a template or you create a template, it's what you add to the back side of this that really makes your winterization plan. This is the narrative piece that answers the 6 questions, but without this, without the schedule, it's worth nothing, right? Or it's not worth very much. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we looked at potentially having a template for Caltrans, it just made this harder, this part that's shown right here. So I hear what you're saying. I think that it would be the more beneficial thing, which John already brought up, is to have some sort of a narrative description of what, and a meeting of the minds of the stormwater coordinators of what their expectation is and the answer to questions 1 through 6. That would be helpful. Probably and that's just maybe, you know, like the instructions piece to it would be helpful, I believe, and we'd get a lot out of it. But
well, we're out of time.
Yeah.
And so one last question, how much do you charge for your training? Or working? $450. There you go.
$450, but you know, call me if you've got a group.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you to everyone who joined this workshop. We'll let you get off so you can join the next one. But thank you so much for this very informative workshop.
You bet. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.